I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, a New York Times Magazine story that's very troubling to many in the Jewish community. All of us remember the passion with which people either supported or opposed President Obama's nuclear weapons deal with Iran. It was the source of enormous friction between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Obama, which boiled over when Mr. Netanyahu accepted an invitation from then Republican Speaker of the House John Boehner to address a joint session of Congress to lobby for congressional rejection of the Iran nuclear deal. And passions ran so high, there was a fracture within what has traditionally been congressional bipartisan support for Israel, as some Democratic members of the Senate and House chose to boycott the Prime Minister's address. While inside the American Jewish community, there were charges of treason being hurled by both sides. Now, in the end, the Jewish community has come to accept the fact that the Iran deal won approval in Congress and is currently being implemented. And the refrain offered by a majority of Americans has become, "It's not the deal we wanted, but no deal would have been worse." And still there are lingering resentments and doubts among many Americans and many American Jews about the wisdom of Mr. Obama's Iran deal, and it's become an issue now in this presidential cycle. Well, in the midst of all this, Ben Rhodes, the Obama advisor who was the architect of selling the Iran deal to Congress and to the public, Ben Rhodes sat down for an interview with David Samuels for the New York Times Magazine and revealed that the administration consciously and purposefully misled the American people by making it seem as if the Iran deal had only evolved after a supposed moderate Hassan Rouhani had been elected president of Iran, replacing the hardline Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. The Obama administration argued that Rouhani provided an opening for American diplomacy that warranted, virtually demanded, the United States lift economic sanctions on Iran and work out the Iran nuclear deal, which, if Iran abides by its terms, means that Iran will not obtain nuclear weapons for at least the next 10 years. But Ben Rhodes now reveals that the Obama administration actually began negotiations on the nuclear deal with Ahmadinejad while he was still in power, and that the fact that Rouhani replaced him was only used to justify the administration's initiative to work out a nuclear deal with Iran. By the way, for many, this is reminiscent of revelations made in 2014 by Jonathan Gruber, one of the architects of Obamacare, where the MIT professor admitted the Obama administration lied to the American people and felt they could do so because they viewed the American people as stupid. And actually, one of the goals of Obamacare is the redistribution of wealth through what Gruber calls a tax. So apparently the administration consciously set out to deceive the American people on Obamacare, and according to Ben Rhodes, they did the same thing now with regard to the Iran nuclear deal. Well, how should we, the American people, view Ben Rhodes' admission? And how should American Jews who oppose the Iran nuclear deal respond? For some answers, we're joined on our JBS phones from Washington by someone who has a long and distinguished diplomatic career as a Republican advocate, Mr. Elliott Abrams, who served in foreign policy positions for both Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush, including Deputy National Security Advisor. Currently, Elliott is a senior fellow for Middle Eastern Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations, and he's the author of a superb book entitled Tested by Zion, the Bush Administration and the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict. And I hope you've seen my discussion with Elliott on L'Chaim before. And Elliott, thank you so much for taking some time and joining us once again on JBS.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Mark.
Well, Elliott, first of all, what do you make of the Ben Rhodes admission overall?
Overall, it is reminiscent of the interview that President Obama gave about, a month ago to Jeffrey Goldberg in The Atlantic magazine, in that it just shows contempt for the voters, for the American people, for you and me, where Ben Rhodes here is basically saying, we fooled you, and I don't care if you know it. I mean, the striking thing is not so much that they did fool very many people. It's the willingness now, not next year when Obama's no longer president, now to say, we fooled you, and what are you going to do about it? Mm-hmm. And, of course, this late in the term, there is not all that much that one can do about it.
By the way, I don't remember a revelation like this occurring in prior administrations. Do you?
No. There have been revelations in memoirs. I'm generally against people writing memoirs while the president they served is in office.
Yes.
Now, Secretary of Defense Gates did it, for example, and Secretary of Defense Hagel did it, both of them under Obama. And I don't like the practice. I think it's a mistake to do that and to criticize while the guy's still in office, although I may agree with the criticism.
I understand.
I don't think it's a good practice. And what's striking here is this is not from a guy who resigned. This is a guy who's still on the staff. In a way, this is reminiscent of, you remember when they cursed at Netanyahu? Remember the chicken blank name they called him?
Very well.
That was done by somebody on the White House staff. For all I know, it could have been Ben Rhodes. While Netanyahu's in office, while Obama's in office, and nothing happens. Nothing is done about it.
Mm-hmm. By the way, why would someone like Ben Rhodes even give an interview to the New York Times Magazine, as you say, quite willing to make this revelation? What could have been his motivation?
It doesn't help the president, so one can only think of, besides just a gesture of contempt at all of us, I'll be frank. I think this is Ben Rhodes trying to get the name Ben Rhodes in wider circulation so that, in the fall when he starts looking for jobs, when he starts to shop around his memoir of his time in the White House, the price goes up.
Okay. All right. First of all, you're associated with the Republican Party. So there may be viewers who are saying to themselves, okay, so Elliott doesn't like the fact that Ben Rhodes said this, and not only that, he can use this as a way to slam an aspect of the Obama administration. I want to ask you a different kind of question. As classless as this may have been, does it change anything about how we, the American people, and how American Jewry should view the Iran deal?
Yeah, I think that look, I think most people, just about everybody in the American Jewish community, dealt with this very difficult and important question of the Iran deal in good faith, whether you were for it or against it. And there were Democrats against it, and, of course, most for it. But it didn't just split in the Jewish community on partisan lines. People tried to think about, what are the arguments here on both sides? And I think what we now see is that one of the arguments that people relied on was a phony. And that's the argument that over these 10 years, Iran has started to change, and it'll change more. Mm-hmm. But now we find out that the deal was actually cooked up before, when Ahmadinejad was still there. There was no change. I would argue there isn't any change anyway. But the idea that it's all connected to change, moderation, modernization in Iran is really not right. It's not accurate. Yes. The administration was trying to do this without reference to any change in Iran. So I think people who supported the deal on the basis that Iran will change should now wonder about that. I'm also very struck, I have to say, this week, John Kerry has been in Europe, our Secretary of State, drumming up business for Iran. That's the Wall Street Journal headline of the story about this. He's drumming up business for Iran. He's telling European bankers and industrialists, go to Iran, invest in Iran. This is really quite amazing. It's one thing to say, look, this is critical, this nuclear question, and we are making a narrow deal with them, the purpose of which is to delay their nuclear program by a minimum of 10 years. Okay, you can make arguments for and against that. What is he doing trying to help the Iranian economy? Mm-hmm. This is a country still saying death to America, death to Israel. This is a country which has a nuclear weapons program, even if it's one that's now been delayed. This is a country that the United States government says is the greatest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. So we're trying to help their economy? The defense of this is, well, this is the spirit of the agreement. The spirit of the agreement? This is a country that just a few months ago detained our sailors in the Gulf and used them unlawfully for propaganda purposes. Was that in the spirit of the agreement? I think this agreement was wildly oversold. And what's even more striking is, okay, now the agreement's there. Why is the government continuing to go beyond the terms of the agreement to help Iran?
Mm-hmm. By the way, from the information you've received, to what extent has Iran kept its word and abided by the details and restrictions of the Iran nuclear deal?
I would say to the extent that we can get the facts, it has. That's my impression. But one of the ways the deal was sold was that we would have under it more and more information about Iran, so that we'll know everything. Kerry said, we'll know everything, and therefore they will not be able to cheat. But the most recent reports this year, after the deal was signed, from the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, say that they actually have less information. The Iranians are stiff-arming them. So I would say, from what I can see, they're keeping the terms of the agreement, but I don't know that we have 100% of the facts.
Okay. And what about their testing of ballistic missiles and ballistic missile technology? As far as you understand, and I've heard both sides argued here, Elliott, from your perspective, was there written into the deal a restriction on Iran testing or developing intercontinental ballistic missiles?
It pains me to say this, but I think the Iranians are right. Prior to this deal, the Security Council resolution said Iran must not, shall not, may not proceed with a ballistic missile program. At the end of the negotiations of this deal, the Iranians presented a demand that has to go. They have to be permitted to do this. And we, the United States, caved. And so the language of the deal says they should not. We call upon them not to. Well, call upon them not to is not mandatory language. So when the Iranians say we're free to do this, it pains me to say it, but I think they've got the better argument.
Okay. According to the letter of the law, they're not violating the agreement, are they?
I think they are not.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any sense of how much of the money that's bandied about X billion dollars that we're going to be given back to Iran, 150 billion, whatever it was, to what extent do you understand that money has begun to flow to Iran, or for all I know, all of it's back? What do you know?
I don't know. I think the 150 is probably an exaggeration, but tens of billions have pretty clearly gone back. But, there's a big difference between, say, 30 and 100.
Yes.
I've not seen a really good accounting of that. What is disappointing the Iranians is they thought there'd also be a gigantic flow of investment. And there isn't, because people are careful. It's not just because of the UN sanctions. They're on the nuclear program. There are human rights sanctions. There are terrorism sanctions. And there's Iran. I mean, it's a lawless country. It's a terrorist-supporting country. It's a country where if you're a foreigner and you get in trouble with the Revolutionary Guards, you're done. So people are reluctant to go in. And they're reluctant to get caught and then, 1 year, 2 years from now, be fined by the U.S. Treasury $1 billion. So that's great. I mean, that's perfectly permissible under the nuclear agreement, and we should not be trying to help strengthen the economy of an enemy country. why Kerry feels he has to do this, it's really astonishing to me.
Mm-hmm. Again, we understand that there is a partisan element anytime I speak to anybody who is either affiliated with the Republican administration, a Republican Party, or a Democratic administration, Democratic Party. But I still want to hear what your answer is, as objective as you can make it.
Yep.
The Obama administration may be making mistakes. It is not, however, out to destroy America or to somehow create a less safe world. Giving them every benefit of the doubt from your perspective, what do you think was really the motivating drive that led the president and a Ben Rhodes and a John Kerry to push so hard for a deal which so many people, including you, thought was a bad deal?
I think the president came into office with some ideas. He was certainly not a blank slate. He wanted to change the relationship we had with Iran and with a number of other countries, Russia, China, Cuba. And he felt that we needed to do this, I think, for a couple of reasons. One was historical. That is, he felt that we, the United States, had done some very wrong things in the past toward Cuba, toward Iran. And I think it's striking in both of those cases that the change in policy has been significant. And the criticism that I and others make is it may have been right to change the policy, but we should have gotten something for it, and we didn't get enough. The bargain was a bad bargain. It should have been a better bargain. And I think that's because the president didn't really think he was bargaining here. The president was trying to rectify historical wrongs. I think that's part of the ideological approach that he took. I think, secondly, and this is actually in that interview with Ben Rhodes in the New York Times, he wanted to break the pattern of American policy in the Middle East, which he thought, was a policy of getting us into wars, and get out of those wars, Afghanistan and Iraq, not get into any others, and diminish or weaken, I would say, the political alliances that we have with a number of countries in those regions. The Gulf Arabs are one group, Israel is another group, another country. And I think those political relations are actually more distant today, weaker today. And I don't think that that's because the president's policies have failed. I think he felt that those relationships with the Saudis, for example, and with the Israelis were too close. Mm-hmm. And you may remember in 2009, very early in his administration, a famous conversation he had with Malcolm Hoenlein, the executive vice president of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, where Hoenlein said he thought, we should have a policy of not having any daylight between the United States and Israel, and that had been George W. Bush's goal, to have no daylight. And the president replied, there was no daylight, but there was no progress either. So he wanted to create some political daylight between the U.S. and Israel. He wanted to change the relationship, more daylight with the Saudis and others. He wanted to change the relationship with Iran and break the pattern of American policy in the Middle East. And I think he's done that. And then one has to decide. You have to decide. Your listeners have to decide. What has it worked? How has it worked? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Seen, as the president now in his last year in office. I think he achieved a good deal of what he wanted to achieve. Mm-hmm.
Good for you, Elliott. All right, I do want to talk now in a more political vein. By the way, you heard me say in the open that there are those who are making a comparison between what Ben Rhodes said in the New York Times piece and Jonathan Gruber of MIT acknowledging that basically they lied about aspects of Obamacare. Do you see a pattern here? And a larger question for you is, you've been part of administrations, and is this something which one could find in many past administrations. I mean, we had the Gulf of Tonkin fiasco in which it seems that President Johnson lied. It's not the first time. There's question as to what did the Bush administration really know or not know about WMDs in Iraq. To what extent is this a pattern? And if it is a pattern, is it a pattern that crosses administration lines?
Well, you can't look at 100 years of American politics and say this is the first time this ever happened to any president, any governor. I'm sure that's right. But I do think, and you can call this a partisan comment. I guess it is. I think the problem with what we see in that Jeffrey Goldberg interview with the president, and now this Ben Rhodes interview with Mr. Samuels in the New York Times, is a kind of condescension toward, or even contempt for, people who disagree. Mm-hmm. It's not the sort of, look, you have your views, Mark, I have my views, these are the complex issues, we'll try to compromise. It's a sense that if you don't agree with me, you're stupid. And Ben Rhodes actually called the journalists morons. That's his word, morons.
Exactly right.
Either you're stupid or you're ignorant, just don't know anything, or you're corrupt. And I remind you that when at a meeting of Democratic senators with the president, Bob Menendez, Senator Robert Menendez in New Jersey, spoke out against the nuclear deal, the president's response was to say, you should do what's best for your country. You should not be doing what your donors want. In other words, your rich Jewish donors. So what it was saying to Menendez was the same sort of thing. You don't really object to the Iran deal. These are not principled objections. It's money. It's donors. It's politics. Mm-hmm. And I think there's been a lot of that in this administration.
All right, Elliott, I've got you on the phone. I can't let you go without asking you a political question out of today. I've seen on American television channels the fact that you are refusing to endorse or support your Republican nominee for President, Donald Trump. First of all, are those reports accurate?
Yes.
Okay. What's your thinking here? And are you suggesting to Republicans that Hillary Clinton would be a better choice for Republicans than Donald Trump?
No. First, there is no Republican nominee, right? There's not going to be a Republican nominee for 10 weeks. So one of the things I'm saying to Republican elected officials, governors, senators, congressmen, congresswomen, why would you endorse him now, even if you say I plan to endorse the nominee? If you do, you've got 10 weeks of Trump making more unbelievable, stupid statements that you're going to have to defend. So why don't you just hold off until the convention? That's the first thing. Because today there is no Republican nominee. That's a kind of tactical thing. And by the way, I also think Republican office holders who are elected in the Republican Party may have an obligation to support the nominee that I, as a private citizen, or that any private citizen doesn't have. Mm-hmm. Marco Rubio said he's supporting Trump because he pledged he would during the campaign. He said, I'm going to support the nominee. I go back to 1972, the first election when I was old enough to vote, and the nominees for president, I was for Scoop Jackson. I was a Democrat then. I was working for Scoop Jackson. The nominees, of course, were McGovern and Nixon.
Yes.
I wasn't going to vote for Nixon because of Watergate, and I wasn't going to vote for McGovern because I was a hawk, a Scoop Jackson, Hubert Humphrey Democrat.
Yep.
I thought McGovern. So I voted for governor, I voted for senator, I voted for Congress. I did not vote for president, and I'm gonna. That's where I am this year.
Fascinating.
I think people should go to the polls, but I don't support either of those two for president.
Okay. And what is your biggest concern?
About Trump?
Over Trump. What's your biggest concern?
Look, I would put it this way. This is a question of character and fitness to be commander-in-chief. And reading speeches from a teleprompter isn't going to change his personality or his character. And I think we have, the guy's 70 years old, give or take a few months. You don't change your spots at the age of 70. He is who he is. And I think we've seen in the campaign in this year, this is the chair of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. He's not fit to sit in that chair.
Mm-hmm. Then
That's my view.
Why has he done so well in the Republican primaries?
Well, this is the great question, and I think certainly I have to say I did not predict this at all. I was confident he would not get the nomination 6 months ago. I think people are angrier at Washington. They're more fed up. They are hurting more than a lot of people in Washington, which is a company town. It's always prosperous. I think the slow economy has hurt an enormous number of people. I also think the tone that I was referring to before from the Obama administration, the tone of contempt and condescension, has spread throughout our politics now, making it easier for somebody like Trump. But I think it's a very, very unfortunate thing that you can behave the way he's behaved in the debates. I mean, demeaning his opponents, the way he speaks, his absolute unwillingness to learn anything about, for example, foreign policy. But people don't care. I mean, look, he didn't win the majority in most of those primaries, but he won plurality. So you have millions of Republicans voting for him, and if he's the nominee, by the way, you're going to get millions of Democrats voting for him too, the so-called Reagan Democrats or blue-collar Democrats. I think people are more angry at Washington than most of us living in Washington understood.
Mm-hmm. Can he win the general election?
I think with two exceptions, the answer is no. I think if you compare his numbers to Romney's, he would have to have such an increased number of white voters. I don't think they exist or are going to all vote. I think what Clinton should worry about that could really hurt her would be things she really can't do much about. One is a terrorist attack in the fall. If, God forbid, that were to happen, a Paris-style attack, I think it would help Trump, frankly, and her health. I mean, if she has some kind of health event that leads people to think, she's not healthy, that's terrible for her, too. Barring that kind of stuff, I just don't see how he wins.
Okay, I understand everything you've said, but there's one, I'm confused at one point. Just clear this up for me. I said to you, do you want to tell Republicans that Hillary Clinton is a better choice than Donald Trump? You said no. You don't want to say that, and you're still not going to vote for Donald Trump. If you vote for everybody on a ticket except the top of the ticket, you vote for governors and senators and Congress, but you don't vote for Donald Trump, in essence, you are facilitating the win of Hillary Clinton. It would seem to me then, on some level, Elliott, as painful as it may be to you, you do feel Hillary Clinton would be the lesser of the two evils.
I don't think of it that way. That is, I am not going to vote for either of these two people. We'll see who wins the election. But I don't think on the basis of, I remember Whitewater and, all of the precursors to today's emails. I don't find her an attractive or acceptable figure, although it's not on foreign policy grounds. I think she'd probably be better on foreign policy than Obama has been. In my view, I don't have to discuss who's facilitating what. I didn't want McGovern or Nixon, so I didn't vote for him.
Right.
I don't want Trump or Clinton. I'm not going to vote for him.
Okay. Elliott, you're wonderful, and I love talking to you. You know what I think of you, and you do fabulous work. You bring marvelous insight. And again, I don't pretend you don't have your own perspective, but you're very upfront about it. And I think we all learn from you, whether we're on the Democratic side of the aisle or the Republican side of the aisle. Continue the good work, and please let me call you again.
I will surely be back with you, and I thank you for all those kind words, and it's great to talk to you.
Thank you very much. The thoughts of Elliott Abrams, who is now a senior fellow for Middle Eastern Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations, and he's not going to vote for Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. And my only problem is, could you imagine what would happen to this country if everybody followed Elliott Abrams' advice. And at the end of the election in November, we would have no president. Anyway, my thanks as always to our director, Sloan Copeland, production coordinator, Serge Goldberg, to the associate director of JBS, Dara Golub, and to the producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.